This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Microphone on. So, can I welcome members, officers and members of the public here in the chamber or watching on the webcast to today's meeting of the Audit Panel. Please make sure your electronic devices are switched off or set to silent mode to avoid any interruptions this afternoon. And the buzz mode isn't very helpful either if it's near the microphone. And can I also ask guests and members to position their microphones so they can be heard clearly, possibly moving it closer to you if need be. And I've been instructed to ask you if you could pick it up by the base rather than by the microphone bit, which sort of detaches and then doesn't work. So could I start by asking our clerk, Paul Goodchild, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for absence today from the Deputy Chairman, Assemblymember Fortune and Assemblymember Harani.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So before we begin, I'd like to welcome all of our guests who will be joining us at various parts of today's meeting. We have, in no particular order, we have Janet Dawson, who's the Head of Government and Public Services Assurance at EY. And we have Enver, who is Acting Chief Finance Officer and Director of Group Finance and Performance at the GLA. We have David Esling, who is Head of Audit and Assurance at the GLA. We have Mark Woodley, who is the Group Audit Lead for MOPAC. We have Luke Marshall-Waterfield, Director of Grant Services and Deputy Chief Digital Officer at the GLA. We have Heather Hodgkins, Interim Head of Performance and Governance at the GLA. We have Sylvia Eda Hassim, Information Governance Manager and Data Protection Officer at the GLA. Apologies if I've mispronounced your name. Please do correct me later when you come in. Rebecca Arnold, Deputy Monitoring Officer and Assistant Director of Committee and Member Services at the GLA. Beth Cushion, Head of HR at the GLA. And Hamida Ali, EDI and Culture Lead at the GLA, some of whom will be joining us later by Zoom. So that's it for a lengthy item 1. Item 2, declarations of interest. Can I ask the panel to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if the members or member have any other interest to declare?
Noted and none, Chair.
Excellent. Item 3, minutes. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of July 2023 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Confirmed.
Excellent. Item 4, summary list of actions. Can we note the completed actions arising from the previous meetings of the audit panel?
Noted.
Excellent. Item 5, external audit status report, our first actual real item. We're joined in the chamber by Janet Dawson, who's Head of Government and Public Services Assurance at EY. If you could introduce the GLA audit status report for the year ended 31st of March 2023.
Thanks very much, Chair. Is that working? You can hear
That is working absolutely perfectly.
Super. Excellent. So this is, as we've named it, our audit status report. It provides you with the position of the audit, which is currently in flight. I'm pleased to say that it is in time and in line with our plan that we set out at a previous meeting. So we are still anticipating being able to report the audit before the end of this calendar year. So it's a combination of updates and some early conclusions. You'll see as you go through the detail of the key risk areas that some we've substantially completed our work, but others are still ongoing. So I'll happy to take any questions on that from the panel if you'd like to. You'll note that our assessment of risk associated with the audit has increased, so we've reduced our materiality across the whole group and are doing more detailed testing as a result of that. Our value for money arrangements assessment is ongoing. You'll see that we are focused mainly on financial sustainability for this year, and that is actually driven by our initial review of some quite significant changes in the financial standing of the organisation within the forecasts, but not an issue of concern, but one that we wanted to understand, which is why we've set that out as a key area that we're looking at, and we'll report back when we've concluded our work on that at the end of the audit. There are a small number of adjustments or differences that we've identified during the work across the full group to date, because obviously the work is ongoing within your component organisations as well, such as GLAP and LLDC. So actually we haven't identified any issues within the GLA single entity accounts to date, but we have down in the component audits. So those are reflected in here. And as I say, a number of the key risk areas are still ongoing, but on track. We haven't yet received assurances from the auditors of the pension fund, which you'll remember can be quite an issue for delay, but we are in regular touch with them and they are progressing. So at the moment, we don't anticipate that will impact on our proposed timeframe. I'll stop at that point. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, I suppose one of the findings was about the sort of misstatements about the sort of, I mean, not enormous in the scheme of things, but relatively large in financial terms. What action, just to confirm, so there was the GLA land and property incorrect credit rating loan, there was the LLDC sale, and the under £10 million understatement. Are you happy? So what action's been taken? Are you happy that we're now on top of those and not expecting any repeat?
No, we've identified those, discussed them with management down in those component audits, and my understanding is that those will be adjusted within the final statements. Okay, and there were 3 potential instances of non-compliance with laws and regulation. It says audit work to assess whether these issues give rise to an impact on the financial statements is ongoing and will conclude outcome of our procedures in the audit results report. I don't know whether there's anything more you can say about what those were, because I don't think you said what they were. So we are required to look across the organisation, and where we identify a potential non-compliance with laws and regulations, we then need to assess whether there's an impact on the financial statements per se, or across the broader governance of the organisation. That work is at its initial assessment stage. That's why we haven't determined it, because it may well be that one or all of them turn out to be a non-issue, as it were, in which case then there's not that much to report to you. It's one of those issues that we've assessed and determined has no impact. So until we finish that assessment, it's probably better that we don't report it to you, and then we'll conclude and then bring that to you at the end of the audit.
Understood. Okay. I don't think I had any other questions on that. Did you have any questions?
I did, Chair. Good afternoon to the panel. It's my first audit committee, so I'll promise to be gentle with you as long as you're gentle with me. I might not. I'm still sort of getting my head around this, and obviously, feeling very grateful for the level of expertise sitting opposite me. But so do be patient if my questions do seem a little bit blunt instrument at times. So I'll probably go in reverse order, following on from the chairs. So in regards to the non-compliance with laws and regulations, Janet, you said that you're still in the process of assessing those. So you can't give us any indication onto the level of seriousness in which they might be.
So the requirements on external auditors are such that if we identify a potential issue of non-compliance with laws and regulations, we have to go through a process to assess whether it is clearly inconsequential, which is far less than the usual materiality levels that we would apply for the financial statements audit, which is, will be in tens of millions of pounds. Is it clearly inconsequential to the organisation, to the governance, and to the financial statements? And if it is clearly inconsequential, then we stop. But if it isn't, then we need to do some further work to determine whether or not there's a fraud risk within the organisation, or whether it's a reporting requirement, for example, something that should be reported to the ICO, and also determine what the organisation has done in response to that. So while we work through that, that's why we tell you that we're looking at it, but we haven't brought it to your attention until we can get to that conclusion stage.
Clearly inconsequential is quite a high bar, so that is sort of reassuring that that's the only point at which you would feel like you can let go of further investigation. But would it be fair to say that even if it's in private sort of committee hearing, that maybe the committee should have a sense of what's being investigated and a sense of what you're doing in terms of your assessments?
So it's a really interesting question, and one that I think we're quite open to discuss with management and the panel as to whether or not that's appropriate. So I'm happy to take that one away and discuss it with Enver about how we deal with that.
Okay, because it sounds like it's not confidential in the sense that there's no clear regulations or rules around not sharing that information confidentially within the committee. So you assess it on a case-by-case basis?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, if with the chair's indulgence, it would be good if you could go away and have that conversation and let us know if you are unable to share that assessment, why that is, so that we have a clear understanding of whether we're not being kept in the loop regarding something. I have a few more questions, if that's all right, Chair.
I haven't got anyone else wanting to come.
not fighting with other committee members for some time on this. Again, this might be too premature, and I can appreciate if if you'd rather we move away from this, but so far in your assessment, even if at the conclusion of your assessment you'll find that it's clearly inconsequential, in which case obviously no further action is required, but to have got to this point, do you feel like there are other mitigations that the GLA should be looking at in terms of internal trainings that would have avoided it getting to the place where the assessment is being made in the first place?
I would say too early to comment.
Okay, no worries. I thought that might be the case. So just coming back to the misstatements that were identified. So as the chair's already talked about, there was 3 specifically. Can I ask Janet, for an organisation of this size, the GLA, how common is it for there to be a number of 3 misstatements?
It's relatively common. It's relatively common. If we look back across the GLA history of the last 2 or 3 years, in the complexity of what you do, the complexity of, for example, some of your investments or your arrangements such as joint ventures across the broader group, there are very specific accounting requirements about the assessment of valuation in those. You'll also find that some of the contractual arrangements, transactions that are going on, so the one that comes out of LLDC, sometimes it can be a question of timing or judgment to reflect those. And then evaluations of the property portfolio in particular are highly complex, require specialists. Quite often you get a slightly different view between management specialists and the auditor's specialist. So you may well get a difference there. So they're not indicative of a pervasive issue, and the history of the preparation of accounts in the past has been of a pretty high standard. So, nothing at this point that we would be flagging to you to say, we have a concern.
Okay, that is really helpful, and I appreciate you sort of being quite measured in understanding the complexities of the operation of a GLA. So you referred briefly to the history of accounts as well. So is this comparatively to previous years? Where does this sit? To reiterate what you're saying, basically, it seems to be broadly in line with the assessments in the previous years.
Yes. So that your accounts are complex. Your group structure is complex. Last year we had some significant changes in the accounts, but that was a very specific challenge and issue. The risk areas that we're focusing on are not significantly different from previous years, and they do just reflect the complexity of pulling your accounts together, rather than any underlying concern over controls in particular or preparation.
Thank you. So to confirm, there haven't been a vastly huge number or zero missteps previously, but this is in the wider pattern of previous accounts.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I don't have any other indications to come in, so in that case, I think that ends item 5. Thank you very much, Janet. If we now, I need to say, can I ask the panel to note the contents of the External Auditor's GLA Audit Status Report as attached at Appendix 1.
Noted.
Noted. Good. Excellent. So that takes us to item 6, which is our thematic review of grant making. So we are joined, we're joined by many people, but specifically relating to this item, I think Luke Marshall-Waterfield, who is the Director of Grant Services and Deputy Chief Digital Officer of the GLA. Hello, Luke. As well, I was just going to say, as well as Enver Ember, again, who is the Interim Chief Finance Officer at the GLA, Mark Woodley, Group Audit Lead, Med Officer for Policing and Crime, and David Esling, Head of Audit Assurance. So did you want to lead off, Luke, with some sort of thoughts, I think, and then we can sort of go into some questions?
This is a new piece of work. I've been in post for just over a month. It has come out of a review of GLA Ops, which is the open project system which was built to manage specifically housing and land projects originally. That has now, our view is that's reached its potential within the organisation. We could maintain it and keep using it, but it will become, because of the way in which it was built, it'll become increasingly expensive to maintain, and we're not able to grow that as a a core corporate service within the organisation that might serve other user needs and other business units. And we'd like to be able to develop a more corporate approach to grant making and to management of those sorts of projects, and to use the best available technology to do that. So the project that I'm leading is to scope how we might go about doing that. So the first phase is a discovery exercise, which we're going to procurement for at the moment, which will begin in hopefully November, run through to the end of the financial year. And that's very much looking at the what and the why. What do we do at the moment? What do all the teams, what do all the units across the organisation actually manage? How do they manage it? What are their pain points? And then we'll move into a technical discovery, probably in the middle of next year, which will take the findings of that report, look at the organisation, how we're functioning at the moment, and then look about, what are the tools, the systems, the processes, the people we might need to, bring in the design. It's kind of designing the whole service, not just a single bit of software, basically. But at that point, we'll know much more about what it's going to take to implement the sort of change and the sort of ambition we're looking at. Okay. I expect it will take some time.
No, I can see it's a big project. I suppose just in terms of sort of setting terms of debate, if you like, so obviously GLA is both a recipient of grants from others and a giver of grants to various organisations, and also various bits of the GLA. We were just hearing from Janet about how the GLA is this complicated organisation, and actually several different bits of it each give and receive grants. So in terms of the scope of what you're looking at, is it looking at the incoming and the outgoing and all of the different parts of the GLA? Is that roughly the scope?
The current scope is very broad, yeah. So it's where we receive money, where we hold it, process it, and then pay it out again. We're speaking to everybody who has some responsibility in that area, including some partners externally, where we grant money to them, who then they loan money on. Once we've reviewed all of that, we may then take a view on which elements we think are we're best able to offer some improvements to. As it's complicated and complex, and there's a balance between the change that we would like to implement and what we'd like to achieve, and the cost and value for money we can get from making changes. So we'll take an assessment at the end of the first phase on exactly what the scope of the technical implementation might be.
Okay. I mean, two things that strike, well, three really, I suppose. One of them hinted at just now is we've got various different organisations within the GLA who are giving grants. Are they using a similar process, similar criteria, similar approach? I think that's one question I have. The second one is the application process overly onerous? I mean, when you speak to groups that request, groups that apply for grants, that's one of the things they'll typically say, not specifically about the GLA, but in general about grant awarding bodies. They can have quite a wall of paperwork that can be quite a deterrent. And then you get organisations that are quite adept at scaling that wall, and others who feel quite deterred. And it may be that some of those who are deterred ought to be getting some money. And then the third one, I suppose, and I suppose this is one that's particularly of interest to me, is whether, having sent money out, how confident we are that the money is actually being spent in the way that we intended it to. So in other words, I hesitate to use the word audit, but this is the audit panel, isn't it? So let's go for it. To what extent do we quality check that, if we award a grant to a particular body, let's say a charity, to do a particular piece of work, that the £80,000 that we gave them to do that work, did it actually get used for that work, or was it either deliberately or accidentally spent on something else? So it seems to me those are the three things, like consistency, ease of access, and follow-up. So are those three things that you're looking at in your piece of work, and do you have any initial thoughts on those three?
I will definitely pass over to colleagues to my right on some of this. I suppose to talk about the overall approach, I'm not trying to deliver a specific solution. I'm trying to de-risk the outcome that we are trying to achieve as an organisation. And that organisation is to, that goal is to deliver grants to deliver some sort of outcome. Some of those risks are easy to quantify and measure, and I think this is the sort of work that's focused on here. And some of them are less easy to quantify. I think the one you reference is around the application process, the burden of the sort of the, compliance and evaluation process, and how that might affect the ability to deliver the intended outcome of a programme. What we'll have to do is balance those risks, and do that kind of starting with the financial control and making sure that we're confident that money is being spent effectively, that it's being spent properly in compliance with all our regulations and the law, and that nobody over here on my right will turn up with a report and tell me that we've designed and delivered something that has created significant fraud risk to the organisation, for example. But what we'll do through the delivery is make sure we're working with the grain of all of the existing functions. So we want to make things better. We want to enhance the user experience and identify all the users through the process, understand what their experience is within the context of what they're trying to achieve, and try and make it easier. But the foundation for that has to be based on risk and making sure that we're not making any huge errors in that process. I think that largely covers the consistency in users' point. I can't speak with any authority yet to the current approaches we take to the monitoring and evaluation and compliance with contracts and so on. I think that's best left to colleagues to my right, as I said. But certainly the discovery process is going to look at all of these questions and identify any gaps and any enhancements that we think we can make through systems change. And we'll work really closely. There's an audit planned of this work, which I think is really helpful. And we're going to work, we will work very closely with the corporate functions in the organisation to enhance those controls and not diminish them.
Okay. Colleagues to the right, or left as I'm sitting, who has enthusiasm to wade in on those, I suppose particularly those three questions, or the second and third, I think, the bit about, I sometimes wonder we have an overly onerous application process in order to compensate for a lack of follow-up, but maybe that's just me misreading the situation. So I don't know. For me, those are two things I'd like to get looked at in all of this.
I can step in from an internal audit perspective. Obviously, we would come in, and the reviews that we've done previously are looking at the control framework, and as Luke has quite rightly identified, some of the issues are, and you mentioned the onerous first phase of applying for grants. However, that probably is compensating for the monitoring aspect later on. So I think it's a balance, and it's a risk focus on which area, and trying to reduce possibly the upfront overcomplicated in some cases, because the risk side of it would be looking at the level of monies that are going out of the business. But I think the monitoring side of any grant application and how that money is being spent is quite key. And from an audit perspective, Mark may have a different view, but from my experience, that's often where things start to go wrong. So it's knowing, has that money been spent in the way that it has been issued, and is there good evidence to support the money's being spent? So from our side, that's where the highest risk often comes in. But I think this is a really good piece of work, because I know we've done reviews over the last sort of 4 or 5 years in the grant space, and I think this is a really good opportunity to try and nail some of your questions, and obviously from Luke's perspective, trying to widen the scope and then narrow it to make a worthwhile and good deliverable grant system.
I don't know whether anybody else wanted to come in. I don't know what does the current kind of follow-up look like? And I suppose, just to set the context, I suppose when I speak to organisations, I suppose particularly my constituency, who are the kinds of groups who might apply for these grants, I suppose I see two possible scenarios where money doesn't end up being spent the way it was intended. So one is what we might call the virtuous scenario, where they say, look, we're doing this really important piece of work. Somebody somewhere in a building a million miles away from us who doesn't know anything about what we're trying to deal with down here in, say, Croydon, they've set some criteria, but actually what we want to do is kind of similar. It's achieving a similar outcome in a slightly different way. We think if we can apply for that, we can use the money this way, and we can achieve the thing that they want, sort of ish. Let's call that the positive scenario. Obviously, the other scenario is where people then come out with a load of iPad Airs and iPhones and I don't know, new cars, where they've applied for a grant and then it's very much not gone in the right direction. So what do we do currently to try and pick up on either of those two, and I suppose in particular the second scenario. Like, how would we know if someone applies for a £150,000 grant and some of it turns into some personal stuff that was not really intended to be part of the...
Sorry, sort of picking up from the themes of the audits we've done in the past, you know, those areas are the areas where there needs to be an improvement. The monitoring of performance, a lot of efforts front-loaded into getting the grant out in the first place, and it's the bit that comes after that that needs a bit of improvement. And I think we've found, sort of going through a number of different audits where GLA Ops has been involved, we've sort of found differences in how people use the system, what evidence is put on the system. And I think another area, in addition to the sort of the performance side and the monitoring that you're getting what you paid for, is sort of things like use of subcontractors, and when you give a grant to one provider, they're getting other providers involved, and getting the assurances that that money is being managed properly as well is another issue that I think, you know, hopefully we can try and work on. But I think what we found is when we've looked at GLA Ops, we've seen some people use it more than others, and I think, maybe, I don't know, but I think there was a general view that people were feeling that it wasn't really fit for their purpose of how they were operating and how they were working. So maybe that it was a sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. Maybe needs a bit of flexibility on it. So yeah.
Yeah, there was the adult education scenario, wasn't there, where we had a subcontracting issue, which I suppose is another type of grant again. I don't know whether the adult education stuff within scope for what you're doing, Luke? 'Cause I know that's its own separate team, isn't it?
It is, yes, because it's one of the main clients of Ops at the moment. So yeah.
Okay. I'm just conscious that no one's quite answered my question about how do we know if somebody's, you know, acquired a new bit of tech out of a grant that we've given them to help, you know, homeless people.
I'll come in now. I mean, from touching on some of the points that have already been raised, I think it is that monitoring, but it's the balance. As I think, as you quite rightly identified, it's that it shouldn't be onerous on the party, but you have to take a risk sort of based approach to the monitoring. So I think I always look at it as dealing as you would a contractual arrangement. So if a group, in the scenario that you gave, were applying for a grant and their thinking is, well, we can flex that in some way. I think that there needs to be a good communication lines between the group receiving the grant and whoever within the GLA are providing that on a variation. So those conversations need to be had, and I think that needs to be open and understood. And then that, if there needs to be any adjustments to the grant delivery or the way the money is being spent, then I think that needs to be open, because all the issues that we've come across over many years with dealing with grants, it's when that's closed and those conversations haven't had, and later on, as you say, you find that iPads and various other. Yes, I can certainly relate to some of the issues that you've also experienced before.
Let me just be absolutely clear. I'm not making any specific accusation about
No.
I'm just picturing my knowledge of human nature and the possibility of sums of money arriving with people.
I think it's fair to say you're probably absolutely correct on the human nature, and sometimes it's because those checks and balances, and that's from the centre side of things, aren't taking place. So those questions aren't being asked. So, you know, it's a natural, it can be, you could describe as human nature, where people will take advantage of that situation. But I think that as long as the reasons for the grant being given are understood, however, if variations or adjustments need to be made, those also need to be done. And that's the dialogue between the grant, those giving the grant and those receiving the grant. I think that's the way I like to frame it, and it's like a contractual arrangement, as you would. Okay. So it would be a variation.
So we do some follow-up, like dip sampling or something like that, to determine, you know, what... Because I suppose what I'm conscious of, you talked about proportionality, but I mean, in simple terms, how much admin overhead do you want to place on a grant of, say, £50,000 or £80,000 to a charity doing some work? Quite quickly, that becomes disproportionate, doesn't it? So that presumably that's what you're talking about, is how do you weigh that up?
Exactly that. It's taken we would call that a risk-based approach. So you have to take in all those elements, the size of the organisation that are receiving the grant. It is proportionality ultimately. Yes, exactly that. And and it's by being a risk based, it's a professional judgment from the centre really of the appropriateness of those checks and balances that they see is required.
Okay. So but perhaps I've misunderstood. So what does the process right now look like? Because obviously there's this review. What does that look like right now, particularly in that follow-up phase?
I mean, I think it varies depending on the team you're talking to, and we don't have I don't have a full picture yet. We've spoken to maybe a third of the units in the organisation. For the larger, for our larger programmes, it's buildings, and you can verify they exist. I know that certainly some of the civil society teams I've spoken to, they are delivering programmes that where we visit, where we ask for photos, for reports back. There is an approach that's taken across all of the teams we've spoken to ensure that there is monitoring of the spend, and that the intended delivery is taking place. But the ways that happens vary, and I don't have a full picture of that yet. And that's a key question for the exercise that we're undertaking at the moment.
Okay, I think then this must be I don't know if you have any questions from the rest of the panel. Nope. Okay. In that case, final question, I suppose, is what is the timeline for the piece of work that you're doing, Luke? What's the sort of rough timeline for that look like?
The discovery exercise we're aiming to complete by the end of this financial year. After that, it's a bit of a piece of string question. Ops has been stabilised, so there were technical issues that were highlighted last year. Have now been resolved, and we can continue. The business continuity there is assured for as long as we need it in order to maintain the affordable housing programme and the skills element of that work. And then it will depend on what we think the scope of the work is and on the implementation of technology. And I think we'll know the answer to that. We'll know more about what the timetable is likely to be for implementation of systems change in the second half of next year, because by then we should have completed the technical discovery. I would expect, based on other projects that we've run over the last few years, maybe we'll have the new model of the service up and running in 2.5 years. It takes quite a long time.
Okay,
yep.
Fair enough. I don't think you don't have any questions on this. No, in that case, thank you very much, Luke. Thank you everyone else who's contributed. Can I ask the panel to note the report and the discussion?
Noted.
And can we also delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with the deputy chairman and party group lead members to agree any output from the discussion?
Agreed.
So that ends item 6. We now go on to item 7. Thank you, Luke. Item 7, which is the internal audit reports. We are joined by, we're continue to be joined by David Esling, who's Head of Audit and Assurance. I don't think I have to read my entire script. What we have, though, is a series of appendices, which our normal practice is to go through them one by one. So, David, if you would like to introduce each report, and then relevant officers can expand further.
Yeah, I'll just run through the progress report, and then Mark will take the detail of the actual reports that we brought for the panel's attention today. Obviously, this is work that's been completed in the second quarter, from July to October, and the reviews we're bringing to the panel today are a full review of the GLA payroll, the follow-up reviews of the staff wellbeing, and the follow-up review of the audit of records management. Just to highlight, we're currently drafting reviews of the use and control of agencies, staff and consultants, and affordable homes. And those reports will be brought to the December audit panel. There's a number of reviews with fieldwork underway, and also I'd like to just bring to the panel's attention, following a request from the Community and Skills Directorate, we'll be carrying out an audit of the 6 providers who are part of the Mayor of London's multiple programme. So that's a piece of work that we've been asked to also do in addition to what's on the audit plan. We've also continued system development work with the adult education budget, which we've sort of touched on in our previous discussions, and that's been attendance at the Audit and Assurance Task and Finish Group with that area of the business. Also in the update and our progress report, we've pulled from the appendices and placed within the report the direction of travel of each of the reviews. So as you will see, there's the GLA payroll in the grid, staff wellbeing as the follow-up reviews, and records management also as the follow-up review. And the direction of travel for the follow-ups has been upwards, whereas the GLA payroll has been slightly down. And as I say, we'll talk to that report in a few minutes. Counter-fraud work that's been completed in the second quarter. Just to highlight that we've got a new counter-fraud manager. Peter Rollison retired earlier on in the year, and Richard Ward has started with us. Richard has vast experience in counter-fraud work. He was with the Met Police for 30 plus years as in the fraud squad, so he's very well versed and in public and private sector fraud and issues with that. Work that we will be concentrating on in the rest of the sort of audit planning year is on the adult education budget. Again, some of the issues we've touched on earlier, and also cyber reviews and cyber attacks that could potentially occur. Obviously, the threat level has increased, so that's a piece of work that we will, having done reviews previously, we thought it prudent to also review those going forward as an ongoing basis. And I know that with the transfer of GLA from TG to TfL, that work we will be working with the internal audit department with TfL as well, so to understand their assurance measures that they have in place there. Finally, National Fraud Initiative, as that work for 22-23 details the number of matches that were received. Those are all being worked through. There were 36 payroll-to-payroll matches. Those have now been closed with no issues. There's still 11 matches that remain open between payroll and creditors, payment data, but we're working with the business to close those off as well. I think it's just worth highlighting that those, since the National Fraud Initiative work was undertaken quite a number of years ago now, the number of matches has reduced, so it shows the effectiveness of that work. That's everything from me. Willing to take any questions on that. Otherwise, I'll pass over to Mark, who will sort of detail the actual, firstly the full review and then the follow-up reviews as well.
I suppose just a quick one on the fraud. I know this is something which we spoke about before with this issue of moonlighting, double jobbing, what have you, which obviously has been somewhat enabled by home working, because obviously if someone's not physically in the building, it's easier to physically not be in two buildings, if that's not too illogical. I know we were going to work with Reed to try to get a grip on that. Where are we on that? Are we making some progress?
We are making progress. So there's a group of CIFES, which is a body that work with public sector bodies, national health, local government, and various other public bodies. We are working with them, and the phrase that they use now is polygamous working, which I was quite interested. So it's a new one on me, but it's called polygamous working, which is basically, moonlighting, I think is probably a better phrase. Yes, no, that work is ongoing, and we've got a meeting and in a couple of weeks to forward that. We're also dealing and working with TfL as part of the GLA family, so they're also involved with this as general. Specifically for the GLA, we are targeting or reviewing the Reed side of things, but generally this is an issue that I think we've talked about in previous panel meetings. It seems to be a problem not just in public sector but also private sector, but it's a new risk that seems to have been highlighted and increased since the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, I know one of the things that was discussed before was attempting to sort of push the risk away from us, or not the risk, move the incentives into the other organisation. Yeah. So it's like, okay, if we find that you're sending a staff who you're also sending to somebody else, then we're going to just withhold payment.
Yeah, thank you. That is very much in the forefront of the thinking to try and get those sign-ups that somebody joining any organisation virtually signing a statement saying, I'm not working with another organisation. So if it is identified, then they basically for want of a better phrase, they will have lied, so it will be dealt with accordingly in those.
It becomes a misconduct issue, I suppose. It
Absolutely.
becomes simpler.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that was it from me. Did you have anything?
I do, Chair. Thank you.
But I was going to say, we are going to go through each of the appendices, but just on the kind of headline bit before
No,
we let Mark
I think just to
start.
flag so that I don't miss it myself, I have questions under Appendix 3 and Appendix 4.
Okie dokie. Okay. In that case, over to you, Mark, I think.
Right, which one shall I start with? Should I start with the payroll?
Should we start with Appendix 1?
Which one's it?
Appendix 1 was the GLA internal... Oh, sorry, you've just done the internal progress.
Yep.
But actually, in my sheet here, I've got you against it, Mark. But in fact, David, I think you've just taken us through Appendix 1, haven't you? Yeah. So we are now, I think, onto Appendix 2, which in fact is Hamida, who I see is joining us remotely. Hello, Hamida.
Okay, this is a follow-up of staff wellbeing. We reviewed GLA staff wellbeing in October 2022 and concluded that the control framework was adequately designed to manage the key risks. Some controls needed strengthening as they were not operating effectively to mitigate the key risks. 3 management actions were agreed to improve the management of the key risks that were identified. Following our review, we've concluded that the overall framework for staff wellbeing has improved, with 2 of the agreed actions fully implemented and 1 not yet implemented. The implementation includes the people function has developed a risk register, which includes wellbeing. The People Function Programme and Strategy Commitments Report now highlights performance across all key areas and includes wellbeing, and also highlights key risks that then inform unit, directorate and corporate risk registers. Also, the Wellbeing Update Report is now submitted to the Health and Safety and Wellbeing Committee, and that's been updated to include e-learning completion with training completion rates for health and safety at work, disability equality training, mental health awareness training, and managing mental health at work. There was 1 agreed action which hadn't been implemented. The review of the wellbeing strategy and the wellbeing subgroup has not yet been completed due to restructure of the people function. As an action on that at the moment, a culture, values and wellbeing specialist was appointed in April 2023 and is currently reviewing the wellbeing strategy and offers with the Wellbeing Network and Directorates. This also includes an appraisal of the wellbeing activity undertaken at directorate level, including best mechanisms to engage with directorates on wellbeing practice and provision. We've got a revised agreed deadline for implementation of the outstanding action of November this year. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know whether you wanted to add anything, Hamida, before I had a couple of questions. I think one, report notes a whole lot of services for staff. There's emotional support services, cost of living hub, mental health advocates, GLA sports club. Just curious what sort of take-up you'd seen from staff for those.
Thank you, Chair. And obviously it's important that we're able to measure the take-up of the services that we provide, although for some of those it's easier than others. But if taking our employee assistance programme, which is one of the main planks of our support, so just a reminder that that is an independent provider. It's a confidential source of help, both through a helpline and then up to 6 counselling sessions. And that could be on anything. That could be work-related or it could be completely independent of work, but is there as an offer for staff and valuable given the opportunity it gives to relatively instant access to counselling support. We do know the uptake of that service. It's 5.4% at the moment. Just to put that into context, the public sector benchmark is about 2.6%. So we are more likely to be using it at the moment compared to public sector comparators. Although the size of our workforce, it's relatively small numbers. So to some degree, that take-up rate is subject to change. Emotional support relating to matters outside of work is the main reason that people are using the service. But the work-related matters are things like work-related stress. So we have that data that we measure regularly. We meet monthly with the provider. So just to give that example, we have a relatively new provider of our emotional support service specifically for Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff, which is provided by Mind in the City, Hackney and Waltham Forest. It's a relatively new provider, so some of that data, I think in the first month, which was May of this year, we had something like, forgive me, I will be recalling this off the top of my head, but between 20 and 25 contacts, and we're in the process of getting more up-to-date data through our monthly meetings with that provider, but they're also providing a whole range of services to those members of staff. Our mental health advocates are a relatively new resource for staff. Those are volunteers, so volunteers from within the GLA staff body who have undergone training provided by Vita Health Group, our employee assistance provider, a 2-day programme, and then they are available to any member of staff. They're publicised on the intranet. They're there as a signpost resource. They're not providing clinical support or anything like that, but a listening ear to anyone who needs to speak to, just needs a bit of support for whatever reason, and to help them navigate what sources of support might be available to them. And we bring, I lead on EDI and culture within the people function, and I have a small team that I work with, and we bring those mental health advocates together to provide support for them. In relation to sports clubs, we're trying to do more in this area to just ensure that those sports clubs have access to just a little bit of financial support, whether that's access to pitches, those kinds of resources. Staff will be paying to take part in some of those activities, but it's just to subsidise that a little, just to encourage more colleagues to be able to have access to physical exercise, which obviously is important to our health and well-being.
Okay, thanks, Hamida. So this is actually a theme that we've had a couple of times on this panel, which is about mandatory training. So I saw that there was, in the report, you talked about encouraging staff to take mandatory training sessions on well-being and mental health. I just wondered sort of what the take-up was of that, and generally, perhaps it's me being pedantic, but to me the interpretation of mandatory would imply a very high take-up, and if you give me a very low number, it will be in line with all the very low numbers I've ever heard in this room about mandatory training. So I don't know whether the health and well-being and mental health mandatory training, what that looks like in terms of take-up.
Yes, of course. So the 4 training courses that Mark referenced, 2 of those are mandatory. That's our health and safety and our disability equality e-learning. And the most recent data that I think I have for that is around, and I can quote the numbers if I refer to them, but they are relatively low. So they're around 400, for example, for the disability equality e-learning. So you can tell that is not the majority of our 1,300 members of staff, but it is one of our EDI essentials, which we are currently due to receive updates from directorates. Our EDI essentials are a basket of priority actions that we require as a minimum standard across directorates across the organisation, and ensuring that mandatory training, particularly disability equality, and our Let's Talk About Race sessions is one of those things that executive directors need to provide assurance around how they're putting steps in place to make sure that those numbers are more where they should be. So you are right, Chair, that they won't have been completed by everybody, but that's precisely why we're trying to, or why we seek to monitor that, so that we can take steps to ensure that more people are undertaking that. I also am aware that colleagues in the Capability and Leadership Centre of Excellence within the People function are reviewing our induction programme as a whole, and how to make it easier, rather than being presented with 20 different types of training as a new member of staff to do within 6 months. How can we make that more manageable and more accessible for colleagues, so that those numbers will look as they should?
Yes, I suppose now we're here was like required and mandatory, and then a number like a third. That is in line with what everyone else has said. We've had discussions about this before, so you're not out of line. I suppose I wonder though, like, why is it that it's so low? And I wonder whether it's that, like, obviously something is going on, perhaps at line managers who are not encouraging or sending or perhaps even discouraging their staff and saying that's a bit of a waste of time, don't bother, I need you working on this thing? Is there a sense of what is the roadblock and what could be done about it?
It's a good question, and I would probably only be able to respond to it in part. So if I speak specifically to the disability equality e-learning, because it's the one that, just in the context of my professional role, I will have more to say on. And I think it's as much awareness as anything else that we have a disability equality e-learning module and that it is mandatory. It's one of the reasons, for example, that we have made it part of the EDI Essentials framework to help raise awareness. One of our colleagues on the People Board had raised that at the time to say, I wasn't aware this was mandatory. So that's part of the reason we've made it part of that EDI Essentials framework. So communications on our part is as much, perhaps in relation to that element, as much part of the reason. And I also think, having made the point about the induction review, given the multiplicity of requirements on staff, just making sure there's that proper awareness so that managers are not in the sense that you suggest kind of willfully making any objection. It's just making sure that people know what they should know in order to be able to respond.
Okay, final question from me. At the other, so we've talked a bit about induction at the other end of the process, where if people leave, particularly if it's sort of well-being issues that have led to people leaving, do we do exit interviews to kind of get any sense of how much of a factor that is for people?
We do, and it is one of those elements and activities that has been affected by the transition to a shared service provider, only in as much as we needed to replace one process with another. So we do have those conversations. We replace that process precisely so that we're in a position to be able to be alerted to any matters of concern. But I think that is a relatively new replacement process. I can happily request any further information should that be helpful, given that I'm conscious it's a bit of a partial answer on my part.
Okay, sorry, I thought I heard somebody speaking then. Perhaps it was just my ears. Thanks, Hamida. I think if you have any figures on that, that'll be useful. I appreciate you may not have them at your fingertips. That would be useful if you could let us know. I think I have a question from Assemblymember Sheikh.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, I wasn't expecting to ask, but I found everything you were saying really interesting, Hamida, and reading about the wellbeing strategy. I think it's a really fantastic thing that the GLA is doing, and I just sort of wanted to ask if it's common in local government, to your knowledge, to have such a sort of well-established and what I'd say quite broad-ranging sort of like service sort of offers for ways of improving staff's well-being.
Thank you. I think it is increasingly, and particularly in the context of equality, diversity and inclusion work, it's increasingly part of the landscape of that activity. And I think some elements are relatively traditional. So, for example, having an employee assistance provider is what you would expect in any public sector organisation. But I think some of the things that we provide perhaps go beyond that. So having a bespoke service for our minority ethnic staff, for example, particularly because of concerns raised in the context of the wake of the brutal murder of George Floyd, and ensuring that all staff had access to a counselling provider that is trauma-informed, racially trauma-informed, being particularly important. So I think we certainly do our best to make sure that we're as progressive a provider as possible. That's part of the reason for reviewing our offer, to make sure we're as progressive as possible. And one of the things that we would like to consider, for example, is benchmarking. So, if we're taking that to our corporate management team, I would expect them to be asking, well, what do other organisations do? So if we were able to take part in a benchmarking exercise on our provision, to be able to measure against other employers, so that we can have a good offer for staff, and that obviously that's a potential avenue that we might explore. So and I think perhaps just also to say that since the restructure, we are providing more resource, both financially and in the context of people resource. So we have a specialist in my team who leads on wellbeing, which is more resource than we've had previously. And I think sort of post-pandemic and in the context of all the different things that we're facing in the country and internationally, it's increasingly important to be ensure that we're providing a safe an environment for our staff to do their best work.
Thank you. That was really substantial, and I think doing a benchmarking exercise would be good. Actually, I'd love to be able to see the findings of that, because it sort of bleeds into my other question I wanted to ask, which is, do we share best practice with our local government colleagues on this? And I feel like a benchmarking exercise might actually help indicate, for instance, where there might be local government colleagues who might want to catch up on this, because I think it's quite a different environment, local government to regional government, sort of just comparing my experiences as a councillor, and I think there could be some good shared learning there.
It's a good question, and we take part in things like the London Equalities Network, which is the sort of self-managed network of councils in London, where counterparts of mine and other colleagues in equalities teams across councils in London come together to share best practice exactly on these areas. And that's the other benefit of the benchmarking. So often in those exercises, if there are comparable organisations who are doing a particular activity, they will often introduce you to that organisation if you've indicated an interest, in order to explore that relationship and to be able to explore that particular activity. So that could be something that we engage in if that's one of the outcomes of the review.
Okay, fantastic. And apologies if you've already covered this in your back and forth with the chair, I might have missed it. But just to clarify, so the review for the wellbeing strategy is yet to be completed. Have you laid out when you anticipate it will become completed?
It's a very live conversation. So, and I should say that the work to review, I'll use the word strategy, but essentially we're reviewing our offer, the series of services that are documented in the original audit report is exactly what we're looking at. Are we happy with that? Is there anything in addition that we should be doing? How do we have a conversation with staff internally to review and to measure? I mean, part of the chair's questions about how effectively are we measuring our wellbeing provision. Some of that's quite easy, and some of the statistics that I gave you are quite available, and in other ways it's more difficult, more qualitative, more internal surveying. We did an inclusion focused pulse survey in July. There are broader staff surveys that we could have a stronger focus on wellbeing, and particularly to unearth some of this. So some of this is quantitative and some of it is qualitative, but essentially what we're trying to do is review that offer and ensure it's the most progressive offer that we can provide to staff. And I know that the executive sponsor for wellbeing is Helen Ewan, the executive director for the Assembly Secretariat, and she's very keen to take a paper to the People Board, which colleagues in my team are preparing. So I would expect it in the coming weeks.
In the coming weeks. Okay, that's fantastic. And I think you're right, because I think the complexity of assessments, it's the qualitative rather than the quantitative, can make it difficult. So I'm looking forward to seeing, I assume within that assessment is, and the review of the strategy is the mechanisms that you've used to make those assessments. You'll be laying out methodology in it. Was that a nod?
Mm-hmm. Apologies, yes.
Okay,
so it would be setting out exactly what our offer is at the moment, the kinds of considerations that we have on how we could expand it, perhaps some of the considerations for the corporate management team to think about our current offer and the kinds of proposals that we might want to put forward. The outstanding action in the review is about the wellbeing subgroup that existed before. The cultural values and wellbeing specialist has set up a wellbeing working group, and if that continues, that's something that we would need to document through terms of reference, as the follow-up report states. And that is an important route of engagement within the organisation, to understand the kinds of activities that might be happening at directorate level, and to have a good understanding about what the staff conversation is, the staff perspective is on how sufficient and how appropriate our provision is.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Hamida. I think it's a very useful discussion. I don't think I have any more questions on that. So thank you very much for joining us. And I think that now takes us to Appendix 3, which is the Records Management Follow-up Report by Sylvia Edohessim and Heather Hodgins. Who would like to kick off?
Okay, I'll give a quick
summary. Mark.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is unusual because this is a follow-up to a follow-up, which we don't often do. But anyway, in summary, we reviewed records management in February 2022 and concluded an adequate assurance. 4 management actions were agreed to improve the management of the key risks identified with a deadline of July 2022. In November 2022, we followed up the implementation of the agreed actions and concluded that the overall control framework had not improved, as 1 agreed action had been partly implemented and 3 had not been implemented at all. Due to the lack of progress in implementing the actions, it was agreed that an additional follow-up review would be carried out. We've now concluded that follow-up, and we found that the overall control framework has improved, with 3 of the agreed actions fully implemented and 1 partly implemented. The implemented actions include the records management policy has been reviewed and updated. Each directorate has appointed an information asset owner and administrator to take responsibility for managing records in their business area and to assist in ensuring compliance with the records management policy. The information asset owners and administrators have completed an information asset register and a record of processing activities. Progress on records management compliance and the information asset register record of processing activities is now reported to the corporate management team biannually as part of the core dashboard. Guidance has been published on the intranet for the GLA's political staff to follow in terms of managing the GLA records that they hold. The starters, movers and leavers portal has been updated to add pop-up messages requesting line managers to ensure that all records held by leavers are promptly moved to a nominated shared drive in line with the records management policy. The one area which hasn't been fully implemented yet is a checklist and guidance are being developed by the Secretariat senior leadership for Assembly staff to use when Assembly members leave. The guidance document is being reviewed with TfL Legal at present and will be updated on the intranet. A similar checklist will be used but tailored to the Mayor's office. The checklist outlining the steps to take to file, destroy or transfer any information a leaver has been responsible for to ensure relevant information is retained and accessible has not been implemented yet due to a change freeze in place during the transition of the IT shared service to Transport for London and the possible move to the Transport for London joiners, movers and leavers portal. So the one that hasn't been fully implemented, there's, that is partly due to the fact that there's this freeze at the moment to changes. That's it, thank you.
Thanks. The bit relating to Assembly members, at the risk of pointing out the obvious, obviously there's an election on the 2nd of May, and that is a date at which, well, hopefully not too many of my colleagues, some have announced that they're on purpose not coming back, but obviously the departure and arrival of Assembly members does very much coincide with May every 4 years, so presumably that work in progress will be ready for then. I don't know whether that's a question for you, Mark, or if I hand over to Heather and Sylvia.
Yes, I can comment on that, Chair. We hope that the checklist that's been prepared will be ready before that, and is actually work that is being carried out, led by Helen Ewan as the ED for Assembly and Secretariat. But it will be there ready. It's gone through TfL Legal, and I think it's also been presented to the Leadership Board. But yes, there is progress for that, and we intend to have that ready long before May.
Excellent. Okay. In terms of, so just to sort of recap, I appreciate that was a lengthy intro, Mark, or detailed intro, I should say. I didn't mean it to sound like a mild disparagement. So the reason for the follow-up to the follow-up, because the initial follow-up was not promising, it's now more promising. That's where we are. Most of the 3 out of the 4 have been implemented.
Yeah, when we did the original follow-up, there was 4 actions. 1 had been partly and 3 hadn't been implemented.
Yep.
And since in the interim period, there's been a change of ownership of the system as well. And Sylvia's now in the post as well, so there's been a change of role in that area. So, yeah, we don't normally follow up a follow-up, but in this case, because of the number that hadn't been implemented, we felt it was a good idea to have another look at it.
Okay, great. So Sylvia, I'll guess over to you. So in terms of the recommendation that hasn't been done, where, from your point of view, what does that look like? Where are we with it?
Thanks, Chair. So at the moment, we've prepared the checklist, and I'd have to say a big thanks to Mark as well for his guidance on that. So we prepared a checklist just to guide staff as to what to expect, especially with line managers when they've got movers, people who move from teams to teams, or even move from the GLA to external bodies for a temporary period of time, and also people who entirely leave the GLA. So there is a checklist to make sure that those movers and leavers do, go through whatever records, GLA business records that they hold in their personal area, and make sure that those are moved to a shared space, storage solutions that the GLA actually uses at the moment. So that checklist has been built, and it's gone through the digital project review group, and it's been approved to be appended onto the starters, movers, leavers SML portal that we use currently. However, because of the change freeze stemming up from the IT shared service that hasn't been implemented, it's on hold at the moment. But we hope that if the shared SML portal goes ahead, that it will be implemented once the shared service is completed.
Do we know when that might be?
We've got a date in July, I think.
July this year?
July next year.
Sorry, I don't like to sound like a pessimist, but that's how I end up in this job.
Can I just come in on this?
July 2024.
I mean,
Yes.
Sylvia's in my directorate, and I've only just noticed the July date. I think what we're going to do is we're going to do a workaround, a manual workaround, before the IT shared service, because the thinking is there, the checklist is there, and I don't want the system to be a delay, because as you said quite rightly, Chair, there might be a bit of turnover in May, and we need to make sure that the checklist is applied manually. So I'm not really fussed about systems. It's the actual checklist that I'm more concerned about. So we just need to make sure that the records of people who are leaving are handed over under the correct directory in that time, and I don't think that's reliant on the shared service to be implemented, because the shared service is a tick box, and handing files over isn't. It's down to individual people to make sure, or the line manager of those. So I'll probably be expecting the Executive Director of Assembly to ensure that she's got the right staff in place for as soon as we know which Assembly members are not returning, for their files to be transferred over.
Understood.
Anything else, Heather?
Oh, sorry, Heather.
Yes, if I could just add, and this is noted later in the corporate risk register under the new transition risk. Helen and I and Sylvia are very live to this. We know a couple of members have announced that they will not be returning. So it certainly is something we will be looking at as part of the transition as well.
Understood. Okay. You had some questions.
Yeah, I mean, Chair, I think you sort of broadly covered it, but I just wanted to get a feel of this item for myself, in the sense that, so this is sort of the first time it's come in front of me, and I was intrigued about the timeline, really. So the first assessment was done in February 2022, and then the follow-up was done in November 2022. But in those 9 months, no actions were completed, but the assessment of where we were at with this item hadn't changed. It remained adequate assurances. So I'm just wondering if you assess a problem but you haven't resolved it, whether that's a decrease in performance, and subsequently there being an additional follow-up to currently not having had one of those 4 actions implemented. I just wanted to be walked and talked through a little bit more about how you came to the conclusion of adequate assurance for where we are at, and why sort of over a year since the initial assessment, we still don't have those 4 actions completed. So do you see that, we've talked about meeting the July target, but I just wanted to be walked and talked through a little bit about the assessment of getting to adequate assurance.
Okay. Well, when we did the original audit, it was an adequate assurance. Those areas needed to be covered to hopefully get up to a substantial assurance, but because nothing had been done, basically we stayed at the same assurance level. So we wouldn't take the assurance level down or up. It stayed as it was. There'd been no improvement. So that's where we were. So the original audit was inadequate with those areas that needs to be covered. So we didn't change the actual assurance rating at that time. So because we've still got one outstanding area here, which is quite a big area with the checklist, we'll keep it as inadequate. But the actual process hadn't got worse since we'd done the follow-up. It's just that those areas of improvement we'd highlighted hadn't been implemented.
Okay. And then, sort of excuse my ignorance on this particular question, but, this assessment that was made in February 2022, why is it at sort of 20 years deep into an institution like the GLA, do we feel like there was not robust systems in place for the passing over of record management, given that it's quite natural to have a 4-year election cycle where we do see the need to transfer those records?
I'm not sure if we've audited records management previously before my time, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think to give a bit of context, and also those ratings that Mark's just explained for the report are audit ratings, and it's quite explained those quite well. We take a risk-based approach to reviews, and records management. I think previously wasn't seen as an area of significant risk. And this, I know we're going to go into the conversation regarding the GLA's risk register, but we base a lot of our work on the content within the risk register and the appropriateness of those. And we have a finite number of days, and it was deemed at that point to review the records management process due to changes in systems, due to the cycle. And at that point, that's why we looked at it. I can't recall it being looked at previously, but it may have done. I can come back to you and say, if we'd looked at it in the past. But obviously, under that review, those areas were identified. We would normally expect them to have been implemented within timeframes that were given by, as part of the management response. It wasn't, and then as we say, we then did a follow-up of the follow-up. But I can come back to you and look at previous audit. I think it may have been before we actually took that, may have been Deloitte days. So in the 20 years, we haven't been doing it for 20 years, the internal audit process, but we can come back to you and give an answer on when it was previously audited.
Yes, please, because I think I'm intrigued as to why record management wasn't understood as an area of risk before that. So I was just wondering if you could give me your assessment of why that wasn't understood as an area of risk, and what is it that changed in that assessment?
Yeah. Just quickly as well, I think in the number of the audits that we were doing, we were finding difficulty in getting evidence from some of the areas that we were auditing due to the fact that members of staff had left and there'd been no handover of documents, etc. They may be kept on a personal drive or on their email system. So I think that's sort of what another pointer as to why we thought, we need to have a look at this area, because there seems to be a bit missing here. When a member of staff leaves, concentration is on the kit, laptops, phones, etc., not necessarily on the data and the information that they're holding. So I think that was another reason why we decided to pick that up when we did as well.
Okay, that's a really helpful clarification, and I'm really pleased it has been picked up. And I would be very intrigued about a sort of backlog of audit on this, because, for instance, if there hasn't been, I wonder what other holes there are in our records that we aren't necessarily aware of. So I certainly think, if with the Chair's indulgence, that's probably some follow-up work that I'd like us to stay in contact about, please. Thank you.
Were you asking if we can find out what we don't know?
I think I'm asking to say if we have a sense right now of what it looks like for good record keeping, then we can backtrack it to identify where there are gaps in our record keeping, because I think 20 years is not, whilst it's substantial, it's also a sort of realistic time frame, I think, in which to do that backlog of record keeping. I think it's important for good governance to see what has been passed through, particularly between mayoralties, how decisions are made, particularly if they still have an impact in real time now and consequently going forward. I would like to see some of how that decision making was made, and if there are holes in the records around, whether that's emails or files or meetings or minutes that would have sort of captured that decision making, then that's an area of concern for me.
Okay. I think, is that likely to get picked up in is it already covered in this work now, do you think? Or is there like an extra piece of work to look at that isn't covered in this record management thing?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's two ways we can do this. We can factor that into next year's audit plan, or we can look at this year's plan and see what we can do in that. I mean, the first point is to look at what work has been done previously, and I think just to clarify that the number of the records management is picked up in audits generally anyway. And as Mark said, because of those, because of some of the issues that had been raised, it was seen as a focus to obviously put that in that plan for that particular year because of some of those gaps. But we will definitely look back at previous work and also then look at how the arrangements are. But of course, there's the retention of records as well. So it might be difficult. There might be some difficulty to actually analyse what was obviously kept, or what is kept, paper records and obviously electronic records. But we will certainly look and give an assessment on what work could be done on that. I think mayoral decisions are kept. It might be corrected forever. So they are kept forever. So the mayoral decisions are kept, and they would be readily available.
Okay.
So, okay.
Thanks, Mark. Sorry, thanks, David, even. And, well, also thanks, Mark, of course. Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes. It's. Yeah, I've got an entire page of people on my notes here. We slowly whittle through them as the meeting wears on. On which topic? I think that now brings us to Appendix 4, which is the final appendix that we're looking at, so which is the payroll report.
Okay, payroll. We reviewed the effectiveness and operation of the key financial controls in the processing of the GLA payroll. We concluded there was a limited assurance with risks not being managed adequately, with some improvement needed in the design and application of controls required to achieve business objectives. The GLA has agreed 3 high-risk actions and 2 medium-risk actions. The key areas of risks identified are as follows. The GLA establishment list and BACS payment information needs to be obtained and included in the monthly reconciliation of payroll data. The reconciliation should also be signed off by the person undertaking the reconciliation and the officer who's carrying out the review. Key reports are fully identified and received by the GLA on a regular basis as per the working arrangements contract to enable monitoring and review. The reports have been specified and requested by the GLA, but at present the payroll provider has been unable to provide them. Performance and planning meetings are established, including a terms of reference for the meeting as per the Human Resources Shared Service Working Arrangements contract. We understand now that the monthly performance meetings have been established with Transport for London to track delivery against KPIs and overall performance. The review of GLA over and under payments are not included as part of the performance and planning meetings process. The GLA needs to be made aware of all under or overpayments, and a regular review and monitoring of those under and overpayments should be addressed to ensure any issues are promptly identified and addressed. The monitoring of under and overpayments needs to be included in the shared services performance reporting to the GLA. Finally, there is a risk that a number of payroll issues which have occurred since the transfer to Transport for London remain outstanding, and GLA employees are not being paid correctly. A log of issues associated with the payroll and the payment of salaries needs to be maintained and reviewed regularly to ensure issues are being rectified promptly. In addition, GLA staff need to be reminded of the need to provide prompt notification of leavers and changes to staff pay, as this was a large cause of the fact that there were under and overpayments taking place. The GLA have accepted all of the key actions identified in this report and are in discussions with Transport for London to implement the agreed actions highlighted.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
I mean, it's not great. I mean, roughly speaking, what were the sort of key factors of the reason why this was a limited assurance, which obviously is very, very concerning verdict to have reached?
I think a large part is the reporting side of things, the monitoring reporting area. I think that's the bit that really needs the work carried out. And I think also there was a bit of a transfer over from London Fire Brigade to TfL. There's obviously been some issues with the transfer of the data across, and some of those things are legacy issues that I understand that all those have been cleared now. But that's probably the monitoring reporting bit's probably the bit that needs a bit of work on at the moment.
Okay. And I suppose one of the benefits of not working from home, of being in here, is that what happens is people buttonhole me anyway. And I think the sort of the vibe in the building is that there is a big problem with this and people are not very happy. A member of staff approached me today, knowing this was coming here, saying that they just received a letter yesterday from HMRC saying they hadn't paid the correct tax and they're an entirely PAYE person. And so their finger of blame, I suppose, is pointing at payroll, and I understand that they're not the only person. So that those are things that are quite concerning, especially a year in, where it's difficult to say that it's a teething problem. So I suppose on that high point, should I bring in Beth? I don't know, look, where where do you feel we are in terms of getting a grip of all of this and sort of getting back on an even keel?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So first of all, it's probably helpful just to say from the outset that this report, of course, cuts across or impacts people function and finance colleagues. So, and that I will answer, but please feel free to come in if you think there's anything in particular that you want to highlight on behalf of your team. So I'll just step back a second, and I think it's fair to identify that the transition to a HR shared service with TfL that happened a year ago was quite a significant change, with changes to systems, processes, ways of working and culture. So I think there were a number of issues that emerged when we first transitioned, and I think it's fair to say issues that couldn't have been fully anticipated either by GLA or TfL, and some of these are detailed in the report. So we know about some quite big crunchy issues with payroll. They largely stemmed from problems with the configuration of the system, which TfL used to administer payroll. I think it's safe to say that most of those big issues have been identified and resolved, but I think it is also safe to say, and I think I need to be honest, and I'm sure Enver would agree, that there are ongoing issues, mainly around data and reporting, which are of concern, I think, to the GLA. Now, I can't speak on behalf of TfL, but I can talk to what we're doing in GLA to plan and mitigate against those risks. So we are getting there, but I'm not going to say it's a perfect picture. I think as the report sets out, there is a lot of things that we're doing. So we are now meeting not just monthly with TfL to manage their performance and monitor SLAs, but also at an operational level on a weekly basis with senior leads to identify and resolve any emerging issues. The HMRC issue is a separate one, and without getting into the specifics of the case, I was aware of an issue early on with how the data migrated over to TfL, which caused some tax issues. Of course, our ability to intervene with those is difficult because we can't speak directly to HMRC, but that has been on our radar and has been worked through as best as possible with TfL. So I think we're in a better position than we were a year ago. I would be lying if I said we're completely there. There's still a lot of live issues that we are proactively working with TfL on. But yes, better than we were a year ago.
Okay, so in terms of the live payroll issue, I mean, I feel like I'm duty bound to speak up on behalf of Assembly members and also the members of staff who do all the work in this building, frankly. They don't feel they can rely on, I was going to say every month, every 4 weeks, which is a separate issue. Let's not dig into that. But the amount of money that they're supposed to be paid for the work that they've done, they don't feel confident that they're necessarily going to get paid correctly. So, I suppose in a sense it's a positive thing that we've got this weekly working group that's getting a grip, but it's also not a positive thing that a year on there's a weekly working group that's meeting to discuss payroll issues. So do we know roughly how many live payroll issues there are? How many people roughly are there who've got some issue with overpayment, underpayment, those kinds of issues?
So the figure at the moment, and I can check the precise details, I don't want to misquote, but it's around the 10 mark. And they are known complex issues related to things like sickness, absence or maternity. So that's the current state of play. I think we also just need to be mindful, as is captured in the report, there were a large number of legacy payroll issues that predate the transfer that only really surfaced as a result of the move, absolutely nothing to do with TfL, that have been identified and resolved. What I am seeing and hearing through these weekly meetings is that the errors that we are seeing now are fewer and far between. They're by exception rather than because of any wider thematic issues. And a couple of other points I would make, which does directly answer your question, but I think is relevant. So TfL have responded to these issues by not only meeting with us on a weekly basis and a monthly basis to track progress, but they have recruited dedicated payroll officers who now face off solely to the GLA. And I think that's helped enormously. And I think what you touched on there is, and I can understand why, it's about building that trust and confidence in the payroll system I think that's compounded by the fact that we moved to 4 weekly pay, which makes it harder for people to know that their pay is right or not. And with that additional resource, we had over the summer, and it seemed to work well, some dedicated payroll drop-in sessions. And more often than not, the people who are coming to those sessions would talk through their pay. And as a result of that conversation, they realised there wasn't an issue. They just weren't confident in understanding their pay slip. So I'm not in any way saying that there aren't issues. I feel, and I hope, and I think the data suggests that they are isolated cases rather than wider issues. But what we're doing is just trying to manage the situation and build that confidence and reassurance.
Yeah, I know the move from monthly to 4 weekly wasn't popular, but that's not our job to look at that today. That decision has been made, so but that I don't want to dwell on. But you're right, that's obviously fed into a mood, let's put it that way.
Yeah, understood.
I suppose the other thing, just on this reporting, I think the final question from me for Mo is, in terms of the reporting, what the report's suggesting is that this is to do with the sheds, the interplay, let's put it that way, between the HR service and the IT service. And obviously we're a year and a half away from the IT shared service. So when do we think the reporting is going to work? And I hope the answer isn't in about 18 months' time.
So it will be fully resolved when we move to ITSS. And just very quickly, the reason for that is we entered into the shared service with an expectation of being able to more easily self-serve on data and reporting. It's not until we move to ITSS and we're all given one London account that we will have access to the TfL networks and their SAP system. Now, that's not to say that we're doing nothing about it in the meantime, and it is a live issue that we've been in conversations with TfL about. What that means for TfL is any report or data requests, we need to feed through to the team in TfL, and they need to manually produce them for us. So it's not saying we don't have any data, it's just slower and a bit more difficult to get it out of them. But what we've discussed and agreed is for them to slightly increase the resource in their team, to have people dedicated to GLA who can respond to those demands. So that's the kind of mitigation in the meantime. I think I should also highlight, and this is captured in the report, it's not just about ITSS. I think the full breadth of the data and reporting requirements on behalf of the GLA goes beyond the scope of the shared service agreement, which is written in very high level detail. And these are reports, and I'm not a tech person, so I'll try and explain it as best as I can in layman's terms, but reports that need to be built and configured from scratch. So TfL are prioritising as best as they can GLA needs, building those bespoke reports for us and responding to requests for data so that we can fulfil our kind of statutory and other reporting requirements. So it's not going to be perfect. There's a lot of manual workarounds that will only be resolved when we move to ITSS, but there is mitigations in the meantime.
Okay, so I appreciate you're not a tech person. I'm afraid I am a tech person. I can't understand why a person at the GLA can't just have direct access to the TfL system. So I appreciate there are currently two separate IT systems. I don't understand why a GLA person can't have access to the TfL system and then produce the reports directly rather than have to go through this convoluted request process that you've described.
Yeah, and I'll answer as best as I can here, but again, I'm not a tech person, so if I need to get more detail from the experts, I will. Again, I think it's a number of reasons. It's about accessing the SAP system that, at the moment, is a company license that belongs to TfL. So somebody with a GLA email account cannot access that system, and the licenses can't be extended to cover GLA people. But that will fall away, I'm led to believe, when we get those One London accounts and get on the network. So that's part of it. And then I think, as I touched on before, I think the reports that are readily available, we have the reports that were set out in the contract, the shared services agreement, but what we're finding is actually we're getting requests for data to be carved up in a different way, or reports that weren't needed or anticipated at the point of agreeing the contract with shared services. So there's an access issue and a licensing issue, but then there's also the reports being built and available in the first place. I hope to a tech person that makes sense, but I'm very happy to give a fuller explanation with input from the experts.
Yeah, I don't know. I still don't understand the answer to my question, really. So I don't know if it would be possible for you to maybe write to us explaining, but I just don't understand why there's this whole convoluted request process and you can't have a person, one named nominated person who's on the other system who has access. I realise we were talking about moonlighting earlier, but a person who is in some way straddling both organisations who's able to do it directly. But I appreciate that you've given the answer that you have, but I really would like you...
Very happy to take that away. And just to explain, they don't straddle both systems. We do have that dedicated person in TfL, but we're having to funnel the requests through my team because, as you can appreciate, they can't receive, requests from 1,300 people. But as I said, when we've got that One London access, there shouldn't be the need for anybody to kind of pull it on the TfL side and present it back to us. But I'm very happy to take that away.
But just to be clear, when you say that, you say it very quickly, but it's like a 12 to 18 month timeline for when we have the one system.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Okay. Assembly Member Sheikh, I think you had some questions.
Yeah, and I will add probably the same disclaimer for this item as I have all the others, which is, particularly this one, this is chunky and I'm still getting my head around it. So I'm probably going to try with very simple questions because as much as it's a chunky item, I also think there's some kind of quite black and white things that have gone wrong. And I yet don't really have a clarity on why or how they're going to be rectified or even properly identified. So specifically, the issue of over and under payments. And Beth, I think, if I'm correct, did you say you've identified 10 people so far that's affected in the GLA?
Not so far. That's just the live cases that we're dealing with.
Those are just the live cases. So I guess my specific question is, how are you intending to identify those who've had over or under payments?
So we have already understood and gone through the over and under payments that we are aware of in the last year, and those have all been addressed. So we're working on those circa 10. Which are slightly more complex and take a bit longer. In terms of future over or under payments...
Sorry, Beth, just because, like I said, I'm trying to keep on top of this. So 10 are live, but you've already understood the number altogether. So up until now, those resolved, including the live ones, what number are we looking at?
I will get the precise figure for you, but I think it was around circa over 100. But let me get the figure for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I feel like that figure really should have been in front of you for this meeting. But I appreciate over 100 is a good ballpark in terms of specificity. Sorry, continue. You were saying something.
Yes. So main causes for over and under payments are around actions not being taken in a timely way. So instructions being fed through to TfL ahead of payroll cut-off dates, which means that the action happens the following month. So that is something that we in GLA can directly respond to and that is around being really clear in our guidance, what managers need to do, by when, so that they don't miss payroll cut-off. And again, this points to the fact that there's a cultural change here, one where managers previously didn't need to take these actions. It was done by HR officers, kind of embedded in the GLA, but now need to. And since we've built that guidance, we are seeing quite a difference in the numbers of over and under payments coming through.
So more are still coming through beyond the 10 live cases that you have? Some of those 10 cases are a result of over or under payments. They have trickled through. We had a large batch earlier in the year, and what we've got left now is the 10. So I can't anticipate whether there will be more. I suspect there may be, by exception. But you indicated a pattern of a decrease. So I'm just trying to figure out where did you make that assessment of the decrease of over and under payments coming through?
I would say the first 6 months since the move to TfL, there was high volumes, which we worked through, and that took time because a lot of them weren't straightforward, and we've now reduced it to a point where there are only 10.
Okay, so we went from over 100 to now 10. So that's the decrease we're talking. So with these 10 live cases, given that we are beginning to put mitigations in place to ensure this doesn't continue, we should really expect there to be no more.
We should. That is the ideal, but we are reliant on people knowing what they need to do and doing it. But of course, it's our duty to support them and enable them to do that.
Brilliant. So people knowing what to do, can you just break that down again for me? So who are the people and what should they know, and how are you making sure they have that information?
Combination of individuals and mainly managers. So just to bring it to life, when somebody leaves the GLA, they need to complete some actions on our starters, movers, leavers portal. So that notifies TG that they have kits that they need to hand in and other things. But what people weren't appreciating, that there is an e-form that they need to complete with the end date for the person, their details, that goes through to TfL, and that through that they make the necessary payroll changes. And there was just a lack of awareness around those two separate processes. So it's mainly managers notifying the relevant people that they've got leavers and providing them with the relevant details so they can take the necessary payroll actions.
So it's almost as simple as this filling of an e-form out that hasn't been done.
Yeah.
That's resulted in hundreds of, or over hundreds of overpayments and underpayments.
I can't say with certainty that all of the first 100 is because of that. We've got to remember that we had a complex mix of legacy payroll issues pre-transfer that were surfacing when we went live with the system, but not related to the new arrangements. And yes, new processes and ways of working. And I think it's largely because of understanding the new processes and the requirements on managers that has resulted in the numbers.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come on to the legacy issues in just a moment, but I will finish off on this first. So you said in terms of when I asked who are the people that need to know, essentially what I can understand is making sure you have access to the portal and filling out an e-form that updates the relevant information for the payroll. That's individuals and managers. So what is being done to A, inform, and B, support individuals and managers in ensuring that information is adequately captured?
Yeah, it's largely around guidance and communications. So material on the intranet that is very clearly set out, but also we've got a client relationship manager in our team whose job it is to kind of interface with TfL. She does weekly updates to a number of, to managers and different stakeholder groups, reminding them of these key processes and reminding them of the upcoming payroll dates. And we very often, in our core briefs, which go to all staff, remind them of key details, key dates and processes. So it is that education, comms and guidance.
Okay. Because I guess for me, sort of intranet communication and briefings, it's quite a static way of communicating with someone. So has there been any sort of live briefings of different groups or bodies of staff?
So I mentioned the payroll drop-ins earlier. So that was open to all staff and had good uptake. And that's where we covered off some of these key points. There have been various drop-in sessions with different stakeholder groups, but I think the main source of communication is through those different comms channels that I've set out.
Yeah, I mean, again, with the drop-in session, it requires that the onus is still on the staff to actively come into the drop-in session. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, if we've identified a really huge gap in communication that's resulting in a really huge, something quite detrimental to something that's very fundamental to all staff is their pay, that maybe we need to reconfigure the way we communicate it. And I think maybe static forms of communication like a briefing and just having it on the intranet or drop-in sessions, which put the onus on the staff, haven't fulfilled it to date. So I wonder if you'd be up for taking away more active forms of getting that communication but forward for the individuals, but also the layer of management as well. So do managers feel adequately supported in maybe being the middleman, middlewoman for that communication with their staff body?
I think it's a very good point and one that we will take away and consider with internal comms colleagues and others. So I think that's a good point.
Thank you. And with the indulgence of the chair, I'd ask for an active update on that, because I think consideration doesn't give me enough assurance, to be honest. I'd like to know whether that is or isn't actioned afterwards.
Can I just come in, Chair? Bev might not remember, but actually there was quite a lot of that other wider communication, Bev, at the senior leadership team.
There was. Just thinking that,
We were hearing about the payroll quite a lot, actually. It wasn't just static, it was speaking to all the senior leaders in the organisation to also be on guard for all this. So the thing about the e-form, I wasn't aware of the actual specific, but actually the onus was being put on managers to communicate with their staff. We were all being told about the payroll transfer. So that communication was also there, in addition to the ones that Bev has said, both at the senior leadership team and I think what was formerly called Senior Manager Conference.
Yeah, thank you, Enver. That is correct. Again, it doesn't cover the whole staff base, but taking an approach of kind of routing through managers to ensure that their teams are properly updated. But you're right, there were many live discussions with senior leaders around these issues.
No, and that's really helpful. So, Enver, if you were maybe on the more receiving end of that, could you put a little bit more meat to the bones in terms of like how often, how clearly, was there a sense of understanding in the room? Was there space for follow-up? Because I guess for me, I'm just trying to ascertain what has gone wrong to ensure it doesn't continue to happen. And if you feel like there was adequate communication with senior leadership, was it...
I think there was.
Sorry, if I just finish my question, yeah. Was it... at all layers of, or was the middle management involved as well? And do you think middle management should have been involved as well?
So the responsibility for passing it down to middle management was down to the senior managers that were being informed, and they were being given the necessary sort of toolkits and contacts in order to be able to pass that down. So although this wasn't a function in my area, as a receiving manager, we were actually getting quite regular updates, you know, about the 4 week, the switch from monthly to 4 weekly, when it was going to happen, what we were expecting to see, how we were going to get our pay slips, what the onus was on individuals to do to check their pay slips. Yes, it's more complicated when you go from monthly to 4 weekly, because even as a sort of so-called numbers expert, I struggled to work out whether I was actually getting my right salary. So I think it might have taken people a few payrolls before they spotted that maybe their salary wasn't right. I thought the communication was good, but as in whenever you change over a provider, there's always problems, and I don't think what we've had here is any different to other organisations where I've seen and managed a payroll function transfer. I was quite surprised that it's only 10 actually. I think that's really good if we're only down to 10.
That's the live cases, not
live
the previous
No, I think
cases.
Previously when it was...
That was north of 100.
Exactly.
Which I don't think is good.
No, that isn't good. But with the fact that they've got it down to 10, there's always going to be situations, because in most organisations someone will say, I've been overpaid, underpaid, because of things like going on maternity leave, overclaiming on sick leave. These are live issues. It's an ongoing issue. There will always be people that might not fess up at first that they've been overpaid. So I don't think the desire is that you can't ever get it down to zero, but it would be good to know that these live 10 have been sorted out. But I do think the communication was good. I think the things that Bev has expressed about the access to TfL is a frustration, and I'm hoping that maybe someone might be able to be given, one of Bev's team might be able to be given access to One London account a bit sooner than the time frame that's been given, in order to try, as you said, Assembly Member, to I think it was the chair, wasn't it, that access to report, because I have to go through Citrix. I can't access TfL directly, and I'm the CFO. I have to rely on the reports that come out of the system, or go through Citrix to get to it, but I can't run a report. So that is, but it's, I think it's a frustration that Bev has said is now being well and truly heard, and our partners at TfL are now actively working with us, and perhaps maybe they should have been invited here too. But,
yeah, no, I would agree with that. I'm surprised they weren't actually. And I think that I don't think this is the last time this is going to be discussed. So see this as a generous practice run for the next time you're questioned. But I will just, clean up on some of the things you said. You said you don't think this was a particular standout number compared to other organisations that might be having a transfer. So I wonder whether there's some further work to be done on, maybe once the issues have been resolved, doing that comparative work, that benchmarking work, to see comparatively actually whether it was significant or not. And you sort of have put yourself a little bit in the limelight there, Enver. If you feel like the senior management team were communicated properly, were briefed properly, then what happened between senior management and middle management? Because then that's where it's gone wrong. So I don't know if you have any explanation for that.
I don't in my area, because I'm not aware of any under or overs in my area, because I communicated with my people and through the senior managers that sit under me, and I wasn't aware of any unders and overs in my directorate.
Okay, maybe in the other directorates, then what do you think's gone wrong?
I don't know. I really don't know whether they were transition issues or whether if someone's actual payroll record is transferred from one organisation to another intact, and that transition has been done properly, I wouldn't know why the transition would have triggered that. So what I don't know is if it's the transition or whether there are actually new live cases that have come up since the transfer of people that have maybe started on the payroll since the transfer. That's the bit I don't know the detail of those individuals.
No, I agree with that. So I'll come back to Beth actually on this, which is around the legacy issues that you've made reference to and in the report. So there were also overpayments and underpayments in the previous system. So could you please identify, how many there were and why it took so long to resolve those legacy issues and what impact it had on the transfer as well?
Yeah, so what I would say is those circa 100 issues that we experienced or were surfaced when we moved to TfL, a large number of those were legacy issues that had only become apparent as a result of the move. And I think it highlights, I know it's not perfect and we've heard about some of the errors since we've moved over, but this actually highlights why we needed to change ways of working. So without getting into the details, the reasons are varied, but if I was to summarise what caused those legacy payments, it's a combination of no consistent, well-documented process maps for how you action different payroll activity. Team members not acting consistently, the fact that everything is kind of manually done or paper-based rather than in a system. And so it was a whole host of reasons that caused that significant number of legacy issues. And what I would say, and this isn't to, I don't want any to reflect badly on previous members of staff, but it's only when we looked into these issues and started unpicking them that we realised how complex and kind of long-running they were. So, number of reasons. It's really difficult to give you a kind of concise answer around what happened and why it happened. But we kind of redeployed people, got them to focus on working through them and resolving them, which was happening, of course, at the same time as trying to help bed in a new structure, new shared service arrangement and structures.
Yeah, I mean, I have mixed emotions about that, Beth. I mean, it's not really reassuring to hear that there were so many of the issues that we are currently experiencing come from the previous system and our legacy issues. But I suppose I do hear that point, all the more reason why we are making that transfer. Am I correct in understanding that you have a sort of your own internal deadline of November 2023 to establish the full list of issues for the payroll?
I don't recognise that date. I think we have a good understanding of the live issues. I think we've got, I'm looking back at the report, there are November deadlines against some of the actions, but not to understand the full list of issues, because I think we've already got that and are monitoring that.
Okay, thank you. I do have a couple of more questions, but Chair, I don't know if you wanted to come back in. I just need to catch my breath. I'm sure you do as well.
Okay. Yeah, I had a couple of extra questions actually. So maybe one for you, Mark. So I know this question of payroll is coming to the Oversight Committee in 2 weeks, I think, whenever their next meeting is. I don't know if there are issues in this report that you particularly want to highlight for Oversight to look at. Obviously, they have a slightly different remit from us. They're the sort of, inward-looking staffing issues type committee. Are there sort of particular point? Obviously, you've raised reporting as being the big issue in this. Are there other issues that you would like to sort of flag up that Oversight ought to have a look at?
I think that's probably the main thing. I think those key themes that are in the report are probably there. I can't think of any other areas other than those ones that we've been talking about, really.
Okay. And sorry, still with you, Mark. I know that I understand the report was completed in the spring, but was held up by sort of needing clearances. I don't know whether you could tell us which clearances they were that we needed that's obviously delayed the...
Well, due to the nature of what was in the report, there was a lot of discussion to get the facts exactly right, get the points of view across, and also, we had to deal with finance, HR, and we also spoke to people in TfL to get some information as well. So that sort of added to the process taking a little bit longer than usual. But as I say, because it's a limited audit report, so we wanted to make sure we got the facts absolutely right for the audit. So it took a little bit longer than usual. But as I say, we had 3 different parties involved that we had to talk to as well. So what you just described, that sort of the subsequent follow-up, if you like, going to people and saying, this is what we found, what do you make of it, do you want to sort of challenge any of it, that's what's been going on since the spring. And obviously that takes a little bit longer given the nature of the issues that were highlighted, and as I said, we had to speak to 3 different parties as well. So most audits we do tend to just deal with one part of the GLA, whereas with this one we obviously had 3 parties that we needed to make sure that we got our facts absolutely right to make sure that everyone was happy with what we put in the audit report. Yeah.
Understood. No, I think that's completely fair, that if you're challenging people with a limited conclusion, that they have an opportunity to before that goes public to challenge it, question it, fact check it. I think that's fair. Just actually sticking with the theme of the Oversight Committee, I know they had let me think, when was this? Earlier in the year there was a query about how many staff we have. Beth, I don't know, in my notes here it says that the Oversight Committee earlier this year, the workforce report couldn't accurately provide the number of staff employed at the GLA, potentially highlighting issues connected to this in terms of sort of just getting basics right, payroll, numbers of staff. I know it can be complicated in the sense of the number of FTEs is not the same as the actual number of live people we employ, but presumably as long as you define your terms, you ought to be able to give a number. So, I mean, this sort of question to Beth. I mean, did you feel that sort of now bottomed out as well, that related issue?
Yeah. So that was a specific issue, not related to staff actually, but post FTE. And it's because there is a box in the system which captures post FTE, so not individual numbers of posts, but the actuals. That wasn't built into the system. So when the data migrated over, it wasn't pulled out, it wasn't captured in the system. That has now been addressed. So that box, that field in SAP has been added. So all posts moving forward, we're capturing that information. And there has been a process for any new post created in the interim for mapping over what that FTE should have been. So that was an isolated issue, identified because of the system build and rectified. But I agree with you, it's a really important thing for us to capture, and we twice yearly capture it as part of our workforce reports.
Okay, thank you, Beth. I think Assembly Member Sheikh has a couple more questions.
I'll be quick this time, Chair. Well, look, first let me just say, particularly Enver and Beth, I appreciate the back and forth dialogue, and I hope you don't mind my robust questioning on this. But as the Chair laid out very early on, this is a very emotive issue for a lot of the staff, and when we speak to them directly, we feel that stress that they're under. So it's our duty to sit here and make sure that we get the answers that we need to, so that they can feel they get the reassurances that they need. And I think we are moving in that direction. So I'm grateful for your back and forth. Just 2 last quick questions. So the first one is about, and again, I'm still wrapping my head around this, reconciliation processes working and not working, given, is TfL sharing all the relevant information that we need to make the assessments regarding payroll issues?
I might defer to Enver on the financial reconciliation, because that's activity that his team complete. I think it's captured in the report.
Yeah, I think it's captured in the report, and I'd like to say the answer is yes, but then I spotted a couple of things towards the bottom that made me wonder whether it is or it isn't. I know that our chief accountant is signing off what she's getting. What I don't understand is why the deadline for implementation is April 24, because if she's signing them off, I didn't understand why the deadline is in the future, because we should be getting something. I think it says at the moment on this report, and I'm assuming that this is this version is quite up to date, that it's still impossible due to the lack of usable complete report from the payroll provider. So
are you satisfied with that?
No, I'm not. but for all, without repeating everything Bev said, it's and look, TfL are really, really trying with us now. So I don't really want to sit here in a public meeting and criticise them, because I know that they're moving in the right direction. They're having all these meetings, they're appointing the right people to work with us. Perhaps a little bit later than I would have liked, but it doesn't look like, based on this report, that we have got everything we need yet, and we are reliant on this systematic report to come to both HR, or the people function, and finance, to double check it and sign it off. And it is an outstanding thing, which is probably why it's a limited assurance. So no, I think it does need to be. It's definitely something that needs to be addressed, and we need to look at how much faster we can get it. Really.
Okay.
I'm not really. I accept that Bev can only answer up to a limited extent based on what the IT people have said to her about licenses. But I think we need to see whether we can bring that forward a bit.
Okay, I appreciate the honesty there. And is there anything we can do as a committee to help enable you get that information, or do you think you feel satisfied?
I think Assembly Member Sheikh, you've actually helped quite a bit, because I think both of you. So I think today you can take a compliment back from me. Is that it's been more about quality rather than quantity of number of Assembly members, because the challenge that we've had, and I expected it for this particular one, gives us a bit of leverage to go back and say that even our Assembly have now noticed it's not only our audit colleagues, it's also yourselves, and that might help expedite it. So we'll see where we go from that, and obviously if you've got an oversight committee as well in a couple of weeks, that might help as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I was just reflecting actually on this IT question. I don't know what I'd say back in the olden days of when I had a real job. If I'd been the person in the IT department whose job was to try and solve this problem, and my answer was, sorry, come back in 18 months' time, I wonder what conversation I'd be having in my review, put it that way. I feel like that would be considered quite an unhelpful response, and I'd feel quite mortified if that's the best I could do as an IT person. So I'll put it no stronger than that. But anyway,
well, I think April 24 isn't 18 months, so I think that that brings it forward a bit more a bit sooner than that. But I'd like to actually see if we can get it done sooner than that.
I suppose it depends when you start counting from. Obviously, it's not 18 months from today, but we're obviously a year into the new payroll. Yeah. So it's.
If I could just add, I feel it's only fair. I think the data and reporting team in TfL, maybe you're talking about other TG colleagues who have a closer involvement in ITSS. They are, I think it's safe to say, being as flexible and as responsive as they can be. And we've had conversations about the alternatives, from the radical through to how we can make do with what we've got. And I think I probably need to be fair to them, to highlight that they are trying their best to respond to our needs and find other ways through, and bringing additional resource in to meet our needs. So I feel like I just need to be fair to them on that. But of course, there's a wider issue of ITSS that doesn't sit with them. So I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, that's very fair. Thank you, Beth. Yeah, they aren't here to defend themselves, so that's fair. It is the lot of IT people not to be there to defend themselves, to be fair. So I suppose I should reflect on that. I don't think I have any other questions. I think I have two thoughts in my mind on. So this is the last item on our internal audit. So I think firstly, I'm going to recommend. Add a recommendation that we refer this report over to Oversight, so they sort of formally have it to include in their review. I'm also reflecting on whether we want to ask our external audit to have a look at this, whether because it's as I say, it's a serious problem. We're some time into it. I'm just quite concerned. So I think what I'm going to do to wrap up this item. Firstly, I've got my script again. Can I ask the panel, Sakina, to note the contents of the recent internal audit reports attached to the report at appendices 1 to 4.
Noted, Chair.
And then I'm going to say, on the payroll report, can we agree to refer the report to the GLA Oversight Committee as part of their forthcoming investigation?
Agreed, Chair.
And then, can we delegate authority to me as chairman, and I'm going to emphasise this bit because this is normally a formality, in consultation with the deputy chairman, who unfortunately isn't here today, and party group lead members, also not here today, to consider writing to GLA's external auditor to request a public interest report on the GLA payroll system, and that the relevant GLA officer be requested to do the same. So we can discuss that after the meeting, whether we wish to continue with that. But I'd like to sort of put that on the table and reflect afterwards.
Yeah, agreed, Chair.
Agreed. Okay. So that does, after some lengthy discussion, bring us to the end of item 7. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, everyone else. Hopefully, we will be picking up some speed as we now move to item 8, which is our corporate risk register. We're joined by Heather Hodgins, Interim Head of Performance and Governance at the GLA. I don't think we want to go, obviously it's quite a lengthy document, our corporate risk register. I don't know that we want to go through it in any detail, so I would just say 2 quick things. One is, the thing that I'd like to look at is item 1, which is the inflationary risk, which is sort of newly added. It obviously is a big issue, not just for us, but for the world at large, and how we're coping with that, particularly noting the residual risk. And secondly, Heather, whether there's anything in particular that you wanted to bring to our attention besides that point 1.
Thank you, Chair. I think just to note that there are sort of 3 new risks that have come onto the register this time. So one, as you rightly note, is the one around inflation, and this replaces 2 previous inflationary risks, one around the general economic climate and the adverse impacts on the GLA, and the second on inflationary pressures impacting our ability to deliver our programmes. The second new risk I alluded to earlier, this is around the transitional arrangements ahead of the GLA elections in 2024. And a new change around transformation and risk, which has led to us having an improvement and change board. And I think just to note that we've moved our scoring to a 5 by 5.
Sorry, you've moved your scoring to a 5 by 5, you said. Sorry, I didn't quite catch the end.
Yes.
As in 5, 1 to 5 risk assessment and 1 to 5 probability of happening. Understood, or outcome, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so on the inflationary pressure, I think that's probably the one I wanted to look at. We've got obviously there's inflationary pressure on projects, building projects, construction projects, that sort of thing, and then inflationary pressure on business as usual. So I don't know whether you look at those separately in that way, and how we're seeing in practice the inflationary pressure kind of playing out. I don't know whether that's something you can help with, Enver.
I can talk about it. I'd love to be able to help you out on it. So as Heather said, we've had at least a year of inflationary pressure, which I've talked about at other committees, through the budget guidance, through our published budget reports. The reason why we updated it for this year is because I've almost got to the point where the other inflation is almost business as usual. It's embedded in the forecast, it's being talked about day in, day out, and it wasn't something that has gone away, but it wasn't through our various tiers of risk register. It still exists, but it wasn't what I would say in the top 12 to bring to you today. Whereas we wanted to single out this particular type of inflation because we're talking about an industry where it's being impacted throughout Europe, but you can see every day on the television the impact on house prices, what's happening to the market, what interest rates have done to people's borrowing appetite, trying to balance between inflationary pressures and interest rate pressures. And this sort of pulls all of that together to say, actually, we're an organisation across the GLA group where we're building things. Well, we're commissioning them to be built. We don't actually dig any holes ourselves, but we are building things. And the cost of construction is going up. We're not getting as many units for the price that we previously would have done. And attracting external interest into the market is not as buoyant as it would have done before because the market slowed down. So we have to live with that, and therefore we have to look at how much money we're putting into things, what our expectation on outcomes are, and how much additional budget we have to find. So with all the best will in the world, the reason why the residual has stayed that way is because it's a real life issue that unlike a lot of, I wouldn't call this just a pure local authority, but unlike a lot of other public sector organisations, you know, we are in a position at the moment where we're still financially sound, and I think you'll find our external auditors will agree, but we are proceeding with a lot of caution. And so if I was to say how are we managing our risk, yes, we've got all of these things listed here, we're proceeding with caution. We are going through a lot of assessments before we put more money into things. We're looking at the rates of return, we're looking at the borrowing rate. You know, we've recently had our stable credit rating reconfirmed by Standard & Poor's. That's fantastic news. You know, we can't get a higher score than that because as a public organisation, we can't score higher than the government, but we've got the highest score that there is. So, so these are all reassuring things, which means that our cost of borrowing is lower when you keep the credit rating high. So we're doing everything we can to look at where our outgoings are going, to look at where the receipts are, to look at the impact on the local business rates, what the impact on council tax is as a result of those additional homes we thought were going to be built that would generate council tax, which we would then get back through indirect investment. So we're doing all the modelling, we're discussing it with people, we're having conversations through the right colleagues around various development sites and looking at what options there are. Is a joint venture the right option? Have we got the right balance between debt and equity? Are we borrowing at the right rates? All of that kind of stuff. So it's just, you know, basically bringing it here to bring it to your attention to say, look, it's a real life thing. I think we're about as on top of it as one could be. We're asking all the questions and proceeding with caution.
Thanks. That's as much as we can ask. Thank you, Enver. Member Sheikh, you had a question.
No, that's been answered adequately. Thank you.
Oh, in that case, I think we are done on the corporate risk register. Thank you very much. So can I ask the panel to note the corporate risk register?
Noted.
Excellent. And that takes us to item 9, monitoring of expenses and taxable benefits, mayor, elected members and senior staff. I don't know if you had any questions on this? No.
Madam Chair.
Can we note the taxable benefits and expenses incurred by the Mayor, London Assembly members and senior staff during the period April 23 to August 23? Noted. Good. 10, Registry of Gifts and Hospitality for London Mayor and London Assembly members. Whoops, I've lost my piece of paper. You're already getting to noted. I haven't got to that bit yet. We are. So it says here we're joined remotely by Rebecca Arnold. I don't know that we have any questions on that or whether Rebecca had anything to say, and I can't see.
Not joined yet.
She hasn't joined. Well, let me make the wild assumption that probably we don't have a lot of questions. So can I ask the panel to note the report?
Noted.
11, Register of Gifts and Hospitality members of staff. Can I ask the panel to note the report?
Noted.
Audit Work Panel. Can I ask the panel to note the work programme?
Noted.
And 13, date of next meeting. The next meeting of the panel is scheduled to be 2 p.m. on Thursday, the 20th of December 2023, here in the chamber in City Hall. That's it. That's just a fact. And item 14, there's no urgent business that I've been notified of. Therefore, I will... Wait, I'm returning for exempt business. That says in my script. That's not right. We haven't got any exempt business. So this is what happens when you read out a script rather than think for yourself. That therefore concludes this meeting of the Audit Panel. Thank you everyone who came and those who came earlier. And thank you, Assembly members.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.